Let me ask you this, and then I want to get on to some of the policies, because there's a lot of things you and I agree about, actually, and I look at it from the cultural standpoint. I think perception is reality. If people believe something to be true to them, that's reality. And I know that to be true psychologically. You have a lot of theories that are non-consensual. Would you agree with that? They're not widely held theories?
The way I would put it is that I'm willing to depart from orthodoxies if I don't believe the evidence supports those orthodoxies.
I don't want to go into them because you've talked about them a lot of places, and I'm happy to put links up to every quality place that you've talked about them that you would like me to, but you've talked about vaccines, Wi-Fi waves that cross the blood barrier of the brain and break down the mitochondria of the cells, massive increase in school shootings subsequent to pharmas pushing antidepressants like Prozac, chemicals in the water contributing to sexual dysphoria, I assume gender dysphoria in kids, primarily boys, that the election in 2004 was basically stolen, that Bill Gates' 5G networks constitute a mass surveillance system. They're not consensual, they're not widely held. I don't want to go into them now. Like vaccines, for example, you had a great conversation with my good friend Joe Rogan about that, and I'll put that link up so people can listen to it if they want to. Do you have a perception problem? People hear people hear it and say, that's crazy conspiracy theory, but they don't really listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, you kind of put me in a bad position to rattle off a bunch of things I've supposedly said without giving the basis for, what I was saying. And let me just give you an example. The connection between atrazine, which is a chemical that is in about 63% of America's water supply, that there has been an increase in gender dysphoria in this country, and that we should be looking at reasons for that. There's been a series of studies, including one by a very famous scientist called Tyler Hayes at the University of Berkeley, published in the National Academy of Sciences journal, in which he took about 100 frogs, it may have been 70, and subjected them to atrazine at the levels that EPA considers safe. They were all male frogs, and 70% of those frogs became chemically castrated. 10% of the male frogs turned female and began producing fertile eggs. I've been working on endocrine disruptors, which are classes of chemicals like PCBs that I've been working on for 40 years that affect sexual development. It's not a theory. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's well documented. So what I said in that case is, I don't know if it's affecting gender dysphoria. I don't know if atrazine is, but isn't it something that we ought to study? Another thing you mentioned is the school shootings. When the Columbine shooting happened, I think 5 families brought lawsuits against the maker of Prozac, which had just been released. But there have been many, many articles since then, and a lot of evidence that some of these mass shootings that we're seeing in this country may be related to these new class of drugs, of SSRIs and benzos. Those drugs have a black box warning on them that says they cause homicidal and suicidal behavior. We would take 120 million doses of SSRIs.
That's actually not what it says. It doesn't say they cause homicidal and suicidal behavior. It says they can put people at risk for those behaviors. It doesn't say it causes them. It says it can.
Okay, I thought I qualified it in that way, but you're correct.
Because I am an expert on that, and I am an expert on school shooters, and that is not a factor in that. But my point is not, are you correct or not? And for people who are rolling their eyes when you talk about frogs and then jump, no pun intended, to humans, comparative science is a very valid science, and that's how we get a lot of the discoveries that we do. I'm not taking issue with that at all. My question is, do you have a perception problem because people would form conclusions because on its face it sounds crazy. It sounds like a conspiracy theory. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying, do you have a
The answer to
perception
that
problem?
question is yes, I do have a perception problem.
You say I'm putting you in a bad position. I'm trying to clear it up because I see the difference. Like I say, comparative science is a valid thing to consider. And I disagree with some of the things. I think people who say that vaccines today cause autism, I would disagree with that. You're vaccinated, your children are vaccinated, you're talking about mercury accumulation and all which has really been turned down in vaccines. And there are a lot of ways to get around this. Your position is not that radical. You're not putting people at risk with your position. We have ADD in America. We read headlines and we don't listen to the rest of it. I want to be somebody that stimulates people to say, hey, slow down and don't read the headline. Read the story, find out what he actually says about this before you make a decision. So if it's awkward to hear, it's because I think you have a perception problem, but I think the perception can be corrected if people will just take just a little time to hear what you actually say.
Yeah, and I have a perception problem, particularly in the mainstream media. I do very well, Phil, with kids. I'm beating President Trump and President Biden in Americans under 35 in the battleground states. There's a recent poll that has me beating President Trump and President Biden with Americans under 45 because they're listening to long form interviews and they're not getting their news exclusively from the mainstream media. So they hear the longer explanation. They actually hear what I'm saying rather than the mischaracterizations of what I supposedly said.
You stand by what you say. You stand by your positions, correct?
Yes.
And you have explanations for them. Agree with it or disagree with it, but hear what I have to say. Don't just judge me because you think, well, that's some kooky theory. You do your homework. And I disagree with some of your conclusions. Some of them I agree with wholeheartedly. But I've taken the time to hear what you have to say. It's informed. You have a basis for what you say. It's all 100% good faith. And I think most people would change their opinion if they would take the time to listen.
Yeah, I think so too.
The mainstream media doesn't cover you the way you want to be covered. I speak to their audience. And that's why I started Meredith Street Media. That's why I do what I do and have as big an audience as I have across all the platforms because they can get from me what they don't get from the mainstream media. I want to tell them what they don't get about Robert Kennedy Jr. Because you wouldn't get this conversation on CNN or Fox, either one. The conversation we're having where I'm saying, you need to listen to what he has to say before you make up your mind.
I would agree with that. I mean, we find that I have a big conversion rate when people actually listen to me. As you say, I have a perception problem.
Yeah.
And one of my challenges in this election is that the mainstream media, the NBC, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, and CBS, won't allow me on to do a live interview. Most of them won't even allow a taped interview. But I've only done one live interview on CNN, but otherwise they won't let me on to do that.
Why do you think that is? What are they afraid of?
Well, I think there is a political alignment now with the media. They're overtly either Democrat or Republican. And I think the Democratic-oriented networks, they feel like I'm going to be a threat to President Biden if I'm even allowed on the air. And there's other more complex motives. One is, they get so much of their revenue from pharmaceutical interests. Roger Ailes was very supportive of me. He was the founder of Fox News.
Mm-hmm. And I knew him well.
And I came to him in 2014 with a documentary that I helped create about mercury in vaccines. And I showed it to him, and he was completely persuaded by this documentary. But he said, I can't let you get on to talk about it because we get 70% of our revenues in the evening news shows come from the pharmaceutical companies. I think all the networks are under that kind of pressure.